Aeroplanes compress people into narrow aisles and tighter assumptions, where small moments feel louder than they should. This flight began like any other, with the soft hum of engines, the polite chaos of boarding, and a cabin full of strangers pretending not to judge one another. But judgment has a way of finding its voice, and on this plane, it chose the wrong man, the wrong uniform, and the wrong moment. Marcus Reed settled into the wide leather seat near the front, adjusting his jacket as he glanced around the cabin. He looked calm, composed, and quietly alert, the kind of man who noticed everything without needing to announce it. His phone rested face down in his hand. He wasn't scrolling, he was listening. Years of discipline had trained him to read rooms before rooms ever noticed him. Across the aisle, a flight attendant named Lauren moved briskly, checking seatbelts and stowing bags. Her smile was practiced, but her eyes carried tension. She had already dealt with 2 complaints and a spilled coffee before the doors even closed. When she reached Marcus's row, she paused, her gaze flicking to his relaxed posture and then to the empty seat beside him. "Sir, this seat is reserved," she said sharply, tapping the armrest. Marcus looked up, surprised but polite. "I believe this is my assigned seat," he replied, his voice even. He reached for his boarding pass. "Lord Nee didn't wait. I said it's reserved. You'll need to move to economy." A few heads turned. Whispers rippled like turbulence through the cabin. Marcus slowly extended the boarding pass. "I'm in Tua," he said. "That's this seat." Lauren barely glanced at the paper. "Sir, please don't make this difficult. First class is full, and we don't have time for this." Marcus felt the familiar weight of assumption pressed against his chest. He had worn many uniforms in his life, some that demanded respect, some that invited scrutiny. Today, he wore a simple black jacket, tailored but unmarked, no badges, no symbols, just fabric, and apparently that was enough to be doubted. "I'm not trying to cause a problem," he said. "I just want to sit where I was assigned." Laurent's jaw tightened. "Security will escort you if you don't cooperate." The word security landed hard. A man in the row behind leaned forward, curiosity shining in his eyes. Another passenger raised a phone slightly, ready to record. Marcus exhaled slowly, grounding himself. He had faced worse than this, but the injustice of it still stung. Before he could respond, a hand reached toward him. Lauren grabbed his sleeve, pulling sharply. "Get up," she snapped. The cabin went silent. Marcus's instincts flared, honed by years of restraint under pressure. He didn't resist. He didn't raise his voice. He simply stood, eyes locked on Lorenz, searching for reason. "That's enough," he said quietly. Lauren, flushed and frustrated, reacted without thinking. Her hand swung, connecting with Marcus's face in a sharp slap that echoed through the cabin. Gasps erupted. Someone cursed under their breath. The phone in the row behind lifted higher. Machaske didn't move. He didn't touch his cheek. He just stared, disbelief mixing with a calm that came from long training. Lauren's breath caught as realization flickered across her face, but pride pushed her forward. "You assaulted a crew member by refusing instructions," she said loudly. "You need to leave this aircraft." A uniformed pilot stepped out from the cockpit, drawn by the commotion. He took in the scene, his eyes narrowing. "What's going on here?" "This man is causing a disturbance," Lauren said quickly. He refused to move and became aggressive. Marcus finally spoke, his voice steady but carrying weight. "I was slapped," he said, "for sitting in my assigned seat." The pilot hesitated, looking between them. "Sir, may I see your boarding pass?" Marcus handed it over. The pilot scanned it, then looked back at Marcus's, confusion crossing his face. "This seat is yours," he said. Lauren's color drained. "That's not possible," she whispered. "It is," the pilot replied. "And there's more. Captain Hayes wants to speak with you." Captain Hayes emerged, moments later, a seasoned man with silver hair and a commanding presence. His eyes went straight to Marcus, then to Lauren. "Mr. Reed," he said, recognition clear in his tone. "I wasn't expecting to see you here." Marcus nodded slightly. "Captain." Passengers exchanged glances. Phones lowered. The atmosphere shifted. Captain Hayes turned to the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated." Then to Lauren, quietly but firmly, "You need to step aside." Lauren's hands trembled as she obeyed. Captain Hayes faced Marcus again. For those who don't know, he said, raising his voice just enough, Mr. Marcus Reed is the owner of this airline. The words crashed through the cabin like a sudden drop in altitude. Mouths fell open. The man with the phone froze. Whispers exploded louder than before, but now filled with shock and embarrassment. Marcus looked around, seeing faces that had judged him minutes earlier now flush with regret. He felt no triumph, only a heavy sadness at how easily dignity had been denied. Captain Hayes continued, Mr. Reed has been conducting anonymous evaluations of customer experience. This was not planned, but it is revealing. Lauren's knees nearly buckled. I'm so sorry, she said, tears forming. I didn't know. Moffas met her gaze. That's the point, he said. You shouldn't have needed to know. Silence followed, thick and uncomfortable. Captain Hayes addressed the cabin again. We will be delayed briefly while we handle this matter. Lauren was escorted away, her sobs echoing softly down the aisle. The pilot returned to the cockpit. Gradually, conversation resumed, subdued and cautious. Marcus sat back down, his cheeks still warm but his expression composed. A woman across the aisle leaned over. I'm sorry, she said quietly. I should have spoken up. He nodded, appreciating the honesty. Thank you. Minutes later, Captain Hayes returned. Mr. Reed, we've grounded Lauren pending investigation. We'd like to offer you a private suite on board, or you may remain here. Marcus shook his head. I'll stay, he said. I want to finish the flight like everyone else. The captain smiled faintly. Understood. As the plane finally taxied and lifted into the sky, the cabin felt different. Lighter, perhaps, or heavier with reflection. People avoided Marcus's gaze, not out of fear, but out of self-awareness. Hours passed quietly. Meals were served with extra care. Apologies were murmured in passing. No one asked for favors or photos. Respect, it seemed, had finally arrived, though late. When the plane landed, Marcus waited until most passengers had exited. Captain Hayes stood by the door. I'm sorry this happened, he said. Marcus nodded. So am I, but if it changes how one person treats the next stranger they meet, it was worth it. He stepped off the plane into the terminal, blending back into the crowd. Just another man with a carry-on and a story no one would believe unless they had been there. Behind him, the passengers carried something heavier than luggage. They carried the memory of a moment when judgment spoke too loudly, and humility arrived too late, but not without leaving a mark. In the terminal, the usual noise pressed in from every direction, rolling suitcases, echoing announcements, hurried footsteps, and the distant clink of coffee cups. Marcus moved through it all with the same measured pace he had carried on the plane. He didn't rush, he didn't linger, he simply observed, absorbing the way people watched one another, wondering who else might be more than they appeared. For Marcus, anonymity was not a disguise but a choice. When he founded the airline, he promised himself he would never forget what it felt like to be unseen, underestimated, or dismissed. He had grown up watching his mother work double shifts, treated as invisible by customers who never learned her name. Power, he learned early, was often loud. Integrity was quieter. He remembered his first flight as a teenager, squeezed into a middle seat, clutching a paper ticket and dreaming of a future that felt impossibly distant. He remembered the way a flight attendant had smiled at him then, not because of who he was, but because kindness cost nothing. That memory had shaped his company more than any spreadsheet ever could. Behind him, Lauren sat alone in a quiet office near the gate, replaying the moment again and again, the slap, the silence, the reveal. Shame wrapped around her chest like a seatbelt pulled too tight. She had joined the airline believing she was fair, professional, better than the stereotypes she claimed to hate. Yet under pressure, she had chosen authority over empathy, assumption over verification. Captain Hayes spoke with her briefly, not with anger, but with disappointment. This isn't about losing your job, he said. It's about understanding why this happened. Lauren nodded, tears streaking her face. I thought I was in control, she whispered. I thought I was doing my job. Hayes sighed. Your job is safety and service. Respect is part of both. Word of the incident traveled quickly through internal channels, stripped of names but heavy with implications. Training managers took notes, executives paid attention. not because the owner had been involved, but because the truth had been exposed so publicly. On another part of the plane, a young man who had filmed the confrontation stared at his phone, debating whether to delete the video. He had captured outrage, not context. Now he understood the danger of half-stories. Slowly, he erased it, feeling a strange sense of responsibility settle in. The woman who had apologized to Marcus earlier found herself thinking about her silence. She had always believed herself kind, yet she had waited for authority to validate injustice before speaking. That realization followed her home, into conversations she would have later, into moments where she would choose differently. Marcus exited the airport and paused, breathing in the open air. He had meetings scheduled, reports waiting, decisions demanding his attention. But for a moment, he allowed himself to feel the weight of the day. Not anger, not vindication, just resolve. The flight would be documented, analyzed, and quietly folded into policy changes and training modules. Names would fade, lessons would remain. Or at least that was the hope. Weeks later, Lauren sat in a training room with other attendants, listening to a presentation about bias and escalation. Marcus stood at the front, not introduced by title, just as himself. He spoke calmly, without accusation. Power, he said, doesn't come from enforcing rules loudly. It comes from applying them fairly. Lauren met his eyes, fear and gratitude tangled together. When the session ended, she approached him. "Thank you," she said, "for not destroying me." Marcus shook his head. "Growth is more valuable than punishment," he replied. "What you do next matters more than what you did then." She nodded, carrying those words with her. Elsewhere, passengers from that flight shared the story, each version slightly different, but all circling the same truth. Appearances lie. Assumptions harm. Respect should never be conditional. Marcus continued flying anonymously, not out of secrecy, but out of principle. Each flight was a reminder, each interaction a test, not of others, but of the systems he had built. And somewhere in the quiet spaces between takeoff and landing, between judgment and understanding, a shift began, subtle but real, carried forward by those who had witnessed a single moment that changed how they saw the man in the seat, and perhaps themselves. Time moved on, as it always did, but the echo of that flight lingered in unexpected ways. Customer feedback began to include comments not just about comfort or delays, but about dignity. Small phrases appeared repeatedly, words like seen, heard, respected. Marcus read them carefully, understanding that change rarely announced itself loudly. One afternoon, he boarded another flight, again unnoticed. A nervous teenager struggled with an oversized backpack, blocking the aisle. Before frustration could rise, an attendant gently helped, offering reassurance instead of reprimand. Marcus watched, a quiet smile forming. Progress was imperfect, but it was happening. At headquarters, new training simulations were introduced, focused on de-escalation and verification. Our employees were encouraged to pause, to ask, to listen. Mistakes still occurred, but accountability followed without spectacle. The culture began to bend, slowly, toward empathy. Lauren completed her retraining and returned to the cabin months later, her confidence rebuilt on humility rather than authority. On her first day back, she greeted every passenger with intentional warmth, reminding herself that every seat held a story she could not see. Marcus never spoke publicly about the incident. He didn't need to. The lesson lived in quieter spaces, in changed behaviors, in moments when someone chose curiosity over judgment. On that original flight, long since landed and forgotten by schedules and systems, a handful of people carried something forward. They spoke up sooner. They listened longer. They questioned their assumptions. And Marcus, walking through another terminal, blending into another crowd, understood that real ownership wasn't about control. It was about responsibility. Responsibility to build systems that protected dignity and to challenge them when they failed. The plane doors closed. The engines roared. Another journey began, carrying with it the invisible weight of a story that reminded everyone aboard that respect should never depend on who someone turns out to be. As the aircraft climbed, Sunlight spilled through the windows, washing the cabin in gold. Passengers settled, some sleeping, some thinking, some staring out at clouds that looked soft enough to touch. No one knew whose life might intersect with theirs next, whose silence or courage might matter in ways they could not predict. Marcus closed his eyes briefly, feeling the steady rhythm of flight. He wasn't searching for validation or apology. He was listening, always listening, to the subtle signals of a world still learning how to treat people without conditions. Somewhere behind him, a conversation shifted, a voice softened, an assumption paused. It was small, almost unnoticeable, but change often was. And as the plane cut through the sky, carrying strangers toward different destinations, one truth traveled with them all, unannounced but enduring. That dignity costs nothing, and the moment it is denied, everyone aboard feels the turbulence. That lesson did not belong to Marcus alone. It belonged to every traveler, every worker, every observer who learned that respect should be the default, not a reward. In narrow aisles and wide worlds, the choice repeats daily. Speak or stay silent. Assume or ask. Judge or understand. The flight ended, but the responsibility continued, carried forward in countless ordinary moments where kindness could quietly change the direction of a day, a system, or a life. And in those moments, the true measure of character reveals itself, not in titles or seats, but in how gently power is held, and how willingly humanity is extended to strangers, especially when no one is watching. Always.